Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Lasha Kasradze, an international relations analyst specializing in the South Caucasus. We are very honored to welcome Professor Jeffrey Sachs, a professor at Columbia University, advisor to countless governments, and a prolific analyst. Jeffrey, welcome back.
Great to be with you again, for both of you. Thank you.
Well, fantastic
Great to see
having
you,
you again.
Professor.
We want to ask you first specifically about the South Caucasus, because that is a region where we have seen a lot of developments in the recent months, from Azerbaijan's support of the US-Israeli attack on Iran to a crackdown on political opposition in Armenia, and previously an attempt in Georgia to oust the elected government by something very reminiscent of the Euro-Maidan in Ukraine, although that one is already like December, like last year, but still it's still quite fresh to me. What is your reading of these events?
Well, they're all interconnected in the three South Caucasus regions. This is the U.S. and Europe meddling, trying to make color revolutions, trying to, again, get to the soft underbelly of Russia. It's very destabilizing, and it comes from the United States and Europe, especially from the intelligence agencies. I have no sympathy at all for what Europe and the United States are doing, because this is a region that is in between many major powers, Russia, Iran, Turkey, the Gulf countries. It should be handled with care. It is not Europe. Geographically, it is Asia. Europe should get out of there. It's not that South Caucasus should have bad relations with Europe or anyone else. It's that the meddling in the internal politics of these three fragile countries in a very difficult region should be handled with extreme deference and care, so that they don't become the next Ukraine. Ukraine is ablaze because of United States and European stupidity, and they're trying to do it again in the South Caucasus. What the hell is Azerbaijan doing as part of the Middle East conflict, supporting Israel in its attacks against Iran? Are you kidding? It's unbelievable. And this is the CIA at work, these geniuses who will destabilize this region and create a massive crisis.
Do you think even in Azerbaijan, it's part of CIA work to kind of utilize the country against Iran? Is it not something that like is indigenous grown by its leadership?
Anything indigenous would start by saying, we are in the South Caucasus. We are in between a number of powers. We better stick together, because that is where our economic and security future lies. We should not antagonize our neighbors. We should find a way to be truly the middle corridor that connects Asia and Europe, and the North-South corridor that connects Russia and the Middle East. And we should stay out of big power politics, and for God's sake, stay out of Israel's wars. Shame on Israel. But of course, Israel by itself can't be doing this. This is Mossad, CIA, and Europe all playing this game in this extremely volatile region.
Lasha, you're in Georgia. I mean, what's your impression of where Georgia is taking this to? And because to me it seems that Georgia is trying to get out of this, and maybe you can follow up on what Jeffrey said.
Sure. Well, first of all, I understand and agree with what Professor Sachs has just said about surviving in the region. That's what he was alluding to, I think. So Georgia is doing a stellar job. The current government, in terms of geopolitics, pragmatism, and looking after its national security interests, as a small state, as the government that rules the small state, is doing, I think, an excellent job, given the reality that it has.
I agree with that completely, by the way, completely.
Great. That's good to hear. And I'm sure that neither of us here is sitting trying to exaggerate what's happening or I have, it's so extremely politicized, these things nowadays, that we have to be sort of careful, at least in terms of analyzing it, or siding with certain positions. So I'm trying to stick to sort of strictly analysis from an academic perspective. And there is just no reason to suspect that this government is pursuing some or is hitting above its weight, if you will, or that is acting recklessly, which is a fundamental departure from the previous government that led us to 2008 war and almost sort of ending of the Georgian statehood, if you will. Georgia, I keep saying this, and I will continue to say that Georgia came very close in 2008 of August when Russia invaded it from being finished off as a state. And so I think this government has understood the trick where Georgia is in an extremely hostile environment, and you have to act accordingly. Be very pragmatic. Have a zero problems policy regionally, and of course, just like Professor Sachs mentioned earlier, Georgia has and cannot afford to be, sort of belligerent against the West. Georgia needs the West, but not in the shape and form with which the West has treated it in the past over a decade or so.
If I could add, by the way, just for clarity, my admiration goes to the current Georgian government for its common sense and pragmatism. My very deep skepticism is regarding Azerbaijan and the Armenian government right now for playing games, or maybe even that is not quite right, by being used by the United States and Europe for geopolitical purposes which do not suit the interests of Azerbaijan and Armenia. And this is what I really am warning against, just to be clear, which is that it is the long-standing practice of the CIA to meddle around Russia's periphery and now also around Iran's periphery. And that is what is happening right now. And that's extremely dangerous. And the West, so-called, comes and sings a fairy tale to countries like it did to Ukraine. Actually, to be more precise, it overthrew a government in Ukraine so that it could sing its fairy tales to a regime that it installed in February 2014. But the point is that it comes and sings a fairy tale. We will save you. And what I'm saying to friends in the South Caucasus, look at a map. The United States could care less about the South Caucasus. It's playing games. Be careful. Brussels, which is completely incompetent and unable to do anything useful, I'm sorry to say, because I was a big fan of the European Union at one point, but the European Union does not belong in the South Caucasus. It's not even Europe. The ridgeline of the Great Caucasus Mountains is the ridgeline of Europe and Asia. So just be careful not to be played. Pay attention to your neighbors. Your neighbors are Russia, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, other neighbors. That's what's important for you. Don't believe that the United States, especially under Donald Trump, is going to in some way save you from your neighbors. Come on. Are you kidding? They will get you into deep trouble. The capacity of Brussels to do this is astounding, but you could say Brussels is a kind of vassal of the U.S. Brussels is not actually a representative of Europe, or at least of European interests. It's a representative of U.S. interests. That's why both NATO and the European Commission are co-located together there. They're playing games. The South Caucasus has been a place for games for decades. And I could say to Lasha, by the way, just in a personal anecdote on this, in 2008, at this moment that he identifies as the great threat to Georgia, I had the experience of being invited as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York to a talk by the then leader of Georgia, Saakashvili. Saakashvili was a puppet of the United States. He was on the payroll of George Soros. He was absolutely a U.S. A U.S. puppet, let's put it that way. So I went to the talk. I thought the guy was insane, frankly. He gave a talk at the Council on Foreign Relations. Georgia is in the middle of Europe. Georgia is a core member, will be a core member of NATO. Georgia this, Georgia that in Europe. And I walked out, and of course the audience in the United States of New York applauded. Yes, we love you, we love you. And I walked out and I called my wife and I said, this guy is crazy. He's going to lose his country. This was craziness. And a few weeks later came the war. It's so obvious. Don't be played. Don't be owned by the U.S. money. Don't be owned by U.S. NGOs, so-called, which are not quite NGOs. They are GOs. They are government organizations. Come on. I know it, by the way. I've watched this for 40 years. These are GOs. And that's why, when Georgia tried to say, no, you have to register or at least tell us who's funding you. Who got so upset? The funders. You're going to expose us. You're going to prove that these are GOs. This is money coming from Washington. This is a game. Don't get caught in the game anymore. Please. I love the South Caucasus. What a beautiful region. What great history. What great culture. What wondrous sights. By the way, phenomenal tourism, food, everything. But don't get caught in a game which is going to make you Ukraine. That's simple. And for heaven's sake, don't get, like, for Azerbaijan, stay out of the Middle East wars. Stay out of a genocide taking place in Gaza. Don't be, because Israel gives you security systems or spying systems or something else. For God's sake, that is not the future of the South Caucasus.
Jeffrey, Lasha and I were also discussing before you came online, like what the role of the deep state is, because on the one hand, yes, we have the NGOs, you have this various ways in which there's influence being projected into these places, including of course the CIA. But why is it that permanent Washington seems to permanently be interested in these games, even when there's somebody like Donald Trump actually rallying on the call against the deep state? But it continues.
He's not rallying against the deep state. The deep state is bigger than Donald Trump. The deep state means the permanent security system of the United States of America. And that since 1947, when it was established, and I would say since 1945 with the OSS, has been organized to defeat Russia. That has been a primary objective. Now, I would say the primary objective of the deep state is to defeat Russia and China. And a subsidiary goal of the deep state is to make Israel the local hegemon in its neighborhood in the Eastern Mediterranean. But part of a broader strategy, defeat Russia and defeat China. That's the deep state. And the deep state looks at the chessboard. like Brzezinski did in the Grand Chessboard in 1997 in his book. And he sees, the deep state sees every part of the board as part of this game. And it is viewed as a game. It's viewed as a game in two senses. One, in the game theoretic sense, that this is strategy. And we have to put our pieces in different places, our military bases in different places, our color revolutions, our coups, our chosen leaders like Saakashvili and so forth. That's part of it. Second, in the more colloquial sense, they view it as a game. These people don't have their asses on the front line. They're not the ones being killed. They're not the ones dying in huge numbers in Ukraine or being slaughtered or starved to death in Gaza. So it's a game for them, like a video game. It's a long distance combat where nothing gets too personal for them. So they are ready to squander places if it weakens their enemy. Remember, what's the goal of the Ukraine war? Well, our defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, in the spring of 2022, defined it. It is to weaken Russia. It's to weaken Russia with Ukraine throwing millions of lives into the cauldron. But that's the idea. So the deep state has an overriding objective, and that is American primacy. And American primacy is threatened by other large powers. America does not care about tiddling places. I'm putting it in quotation marks. I'm explaining the American security point of view. You think they care about Georgia? You think they care about Armenia? You think they care about Azerbaijan? You think they know even where they are? Well, the only thing they know about them is that the South Caucasus constitutes the soft underbelly of Russia. So we should provoke, extend, antagonize Russia. And we can do it through the neighboring region. And this is how the U.S. is regarding China, and it's how the U.S. is regarding Russia. There's a paper in 2019. It would be humorous if it weren't so tragic. It's a paper by the Rand Corporation called Extending Russia. The Rand Corporation makes a list. What are all the things we can do to annoy Russia? Is this really the purpose of the United States of America? To annoy Russia? Well, yes, it is, according to their view, because we're trying to destabilize Russia, keep it on the back foot, prevent it from having economic development, prevent it from developing normal economic relations, including through the South Caucasus, because Russia trade with the South Caucasus and with the Gulf region would be highly beneficial, or to prevent the South Caucasus from being the east-west corridor, the middle corridor between Asia and Europe. They don't want that. What they want is to weaken Russia. So that's the primary aim.
Lasha, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I just want to add a comment, and then perhaps Professor can answer. So I think one of the biggest problems when you say don't get fooled, right, Professor, don't get fooled with these promises, with these narratives. Part of the problem, part of the reason why they have been fooled has been historical. It goes back several hundred years, if not more. That the idea that in an extreme idealist place somewhere, Georgia always belonged in the West. And, even though it was in conflict with material reality, with geopolitics, that a try after try and attempt after attempt never landed Georgia in the Western sort of elite club of geopolitics, geoeconomics, etc. Right? So Georgia remains to be asking to be admitted. It continues to ask, but no one seems to be asking why is it that it has not gotten into this club, right? That's first point. Second point I want to make is just to take, for example, the post-Soviet time period, post-Cold War period. There has been this wrong-headed, irrational expectation that United States would come in and do some sort of a nation building. Japan, South Korea, Western Europe, correct? After World War II, these have, even though they have not subconsciously rationalized this rhetoric for the domestic audience in Georgia. That's the problem. That's what's missing. It hasn't been rationalized. It hasn't been analyzed that there is no such plan that exists in the South Caucasus, where not just the collective West, but let's just say the United States, with its leadership and with its enormous resources, can come in and rebuild the South Caucasus because of Georgia, or just take care of Georgia, rebuild Georgia, and leave everything else the same as it is in the South Caucasus. So logically, nothing is making sense, and yet there is this rhetoric, this naivete, this confusion, sort of subconscious expectation that America is still coming in with NATO and with encouraging European Union to take care of the South Caucasus, as if no other country has ever existed or exists in the South Caucasus against whom these policies will be perceived. Russia, first and foremost. This is mental conflict, really, a sociological conflict with reality, and this expectation that America is coming in and doing sort of a Marshall Plan for the South Caucasus, which is BS, which never it was even in the plans.
Of course.
So this is, I mean, it's very hard with my colleagues and friends sort of to explain this to them, because actually, obviously, they don't believe in it, and they get so surprised that this was the driving force behind these 30 years of naivete and idealism that basically led us to 2008, and then and Freedom Agenda, and Dick Cheney and Victoria Nuland coming in and telling us that Georgia was the beacon of liberty and so forth. So what are your comments on that? If you could add.
Many things come to mind. First of all, the legacy of the Marshall Plan in the late 1940s and the support for rebuilding Japan in the 1940s was specific to the Cold War period, when the U.S. positioned itself as the new global hegemon that was challenged by one power, the Soviet Union. And so the U.S. built this alliance, or tried to build this alliance against Soviet communism. This was the idea. There hasn't been any such thing since then. So first, South Caucasus is not Western Europe in 1949, and it's never going to be again. At that time, there was one dominant power and one second superpower, the Soviet Union, and we had this bipolar, very dangerous conflict. But that's when the deep state idea, which exists now for, as I've said, 80 years, to undermine and eventually defeat and even destroy first the Soviet Union and then Russia, took hold. And that is what is continuing until today, remarkably, because even after 1991, when the Soviet Union ended and the Russian governments were saying, we just want to cooperate, we just want to have normal relations, the U.S. said, no, you have to get down on your knees. You have to be subservient to us. And more than that, we'll break you to pieces, maybe to 3 pieces, Brzezinski said. You'll be a loose confederation of a European Russia, a Central Asian Russia, and an East Asian Russia. It's a complete fantasy world, but very, very dangerous. Okay. They're not going to. It didn't. I mean, well, I was going to say that the fundamental change in the world since then was not only was it delusional now, but now we are clearly in a multipolar world where the U.S. doesn't even begin to have the power, the leverage, the interest, the finances to do any of that. We're a huge debtor country. We borrow huge amounts every year just to keep our books, our government functioning. The U.S. and Europe are not going to build the South Caucasus. They are wanting to annoy, aggravate, potentially destabilize Russia. That's the opposite of economic development.
How much weight do you put on the generational aspect? And just like Japan, when Japan was occupied, the Mac sorry
MacArthur
MacArthur
Douglas
actually
MacArthur.
thought Japan should be neutral. And this is, of course, a generation of people who grew up in the 1910s and 20s and saw and grew up in the old United States. Now, the people now in power are the people who grew up in the 80s, 90s. Came of age, 80s, 90s,
Yeah.
and 2000s, right? And they're now in their 50s and 60s. How big is the role of this? Like when you were young and what you saw, what the world was then?
Actually, I did not know till you just told me that MacArthur advocated neutrality
He did.
for Japan, because definitely U.S. policy became to occupy Japan basically forever and ever as a military outpost of the United States on China's rim. Maybe the Korean War changed that, or maybe the exit of MacArthur, whatever, but definitely the U.S. would never tolerate a neutral Japan right now in the ideology of the United States. And I think that that's been true for a long time. You and I chatted about my recent rereading of the Melian dialogue in Thucydides in the Peloponnesian Wars, which is a incredibly powerful, grim dialogue in which the Athenians tell the people of the island of Melos, you are either with us or you're against us. And if you try to be neutral, we kill all of the men and we enslave all of the women and children. That's the American mentality right now. I think it's been that way basically, at least since John Foster Dulles became Secretary of State, or since NSC 68 in 1950. When the U.S. embarked entirely on the Cold War crusade, which was a crusade to defeat the enemy and to become the world's policeman. After 1991, the idea that the U.S. would be the world's policeman, which when I was growing up was a negative connotation. Oh, you think you're the world's policeman. But for the neocons, that was the compliment. We will take on, they called it the constabulary functions of the world, that the United States will be the world's policeman. What they meant was the U.S. will run the world, and everyone else will cower or bow down or whatever way to show obeisance to the U.S. The problem with that is that it's a delusion, because as President Lula recently said, we don't need an emperor. So we don't want one person dictating to the rest of the world. And we don't have a sole superpower in the world. So to come back to the South Caucasus, look, good relations with China are even more important for the South Caucasus' economic future than good relations with the United States, just to put it absolutely bluntly. Why? Because China is the large economy of Asia. India will also be a major power, and with an important role, by the way, in the South Caucasus in the future. The U.S. is protectionist, slow-growing market, and far away. And so for the South Caucasus, the strategy of being a stable, secure, peaceful north-south and east-west corridor, as well as being a great location in its own right for every kind of industry, for advanced technologies, for agriculture, for tourism, for manufacturing, that's the future. And so the question is how to get there. And that is not on the basis of NATO. And just to be clear to everybody in the South Caucasus, not a single country in the South Caucasus will ever become part of NATO. Because before that happens, there will be a Ukraine war in the South Caucasus. Russia will never allow that to happen. And I'll make a similar statement. There will never be a Mexico-Russia military alliance or a Mexico-China military alliance, because the United States will invade Mexico before that is allowed. So great powers should not set up their camps on the borders of other great powers. This is the most basic point of survival in this world. The United States, if it had the slightest sense in the world, and it obviously does not, but if it did, it would not even aim, it would not even have breathed the idea of Ukraine or Georgia becoming part of NATO. It would not be arming Taiwan right now. It would be staying out of the lane of other superpowers and telling those other superpowers, stay out of our lane, and then we can have a peaceful world where we don't blow each other up.
Wise
The
word.
other point I just want to mention, the South Caucasus has other choices, by the way. It's not as if the security is, either we have NATO or Russia's going to invade us. Russia is not going to invade the South Caucasus unless the United States provokes it. Why? Because there are many important regional powers in the area. Turkey does not want Russia to invade. Iran does not want Russia to invade. And similarly, Russia would like the South Caucasus to be a bit of a, safe zone in between those other powers. There's a strong interest in stability. And China, by the way, has a very strong interest in the stability of the South Caucasus because it is a core corridor for East-West connectivity, which everybody understands is a major goal of China, by the way, at least since the Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago, which is to make an East-West corridor a Silk Road. Now we call it the Belt and Road. And so everybody wants stability in the South Caucasus, perhaps with the exception of Brussels and the United States. But there's no reason why the South Caucasus countries have to say, oh my God, either we do this or the Russian Empire is going to invade. This is the kind of delusion that, of course, the U.S. would like to imply, but is completely delusional.
Jeffrey, we have to be mindful of your time, and we would like to thank you for actually all of these explanations because they're very valuable. So thank you very much for all of this.
Great to be with both of you. I really appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
This was great. Thank you very much, and great seeing you.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Lasha, that was quite something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was great.
Let's discuss this a little bit. I mean, these very clear words of Professor Jeffrey Sachs. There's not that many people who speak it that straightforwardly. How does this sound to you? Like how he put this, like the geopolitical, the geostrategic situation of especially Georgia.
Well, look, to the chagrin of many, this sounds spot on. It is brutal. It is not what many want to hear in Georgia, but this is the harsh reality. And I applaud Jeffrey Sachs for being intellectually brave to come out and say these things. Not just in Georgia, we've seen the man talk about world politics in this manner. I think that folks like John Mearsheimer, as a student of international relations, Jeffrey Sachs, John Mearsheimer, I think, I want to say I stand on their shoulders in many respects. So yes, they speak the truth. Jeffrey Sachs, what he just told us is exactly what Georgia did not do. And this is, and now I'm not saying that if it had done, exactly sort of the realpolitik, pragmatism, had sort of looked at its regional foreign policy, from a realist point of view, that everything would have been hunky dory. But I am saying that they could have minimized both separatism, the chances for separatism, even though Russia has played an enormous role in that. But there are reasons why. And also, they would have minimized the chances, if not eliminate the chances, of 2008 invasion of Russia when Moscow recognized South Ossetia and Abkhazia as independent states within the Georgian state. So just think about this. Remarkable. Think about that. So Georgia went from bad to worse, geostrategically speaking. And whether Russia will take those, that recognition back, I would say, that does not look good for Georgia. I don't think it will. So for a small state like Georgia, Azerbaijan, even though it's the most powerful state, let's just say in the South Caucasus, right? Certainly, incomparably more powerful than Georgia and Armenia. It also has to tread very carefully. And this whole encouragement of Armenia by the collective West to get on their camp, strategic camp that will join. Just think about this: Armenia shaking hands with Erdogan, Pashinyan shaking hands with Erdogan. This is sort of this diplomatic revolution that is taking place from back in the history. But this does not hold water. This just cannot. This is not fundamentally based on strong policy or on sustainable policy, geopolitically speaking. I think this is the Georgianization of Armenia 2.0. That's what happened when Saakashvili came to power, supported by neocons in Washington, encouraged and egged on against Russia. And while we don't see the exact sort of similarities, the exact parallels, we see similarities. Yes, the West is not as intense and as aggressive towards in egging Armenia against Russia, but it is trying to sort of peel it away from Russia somehow, right? Try to sort of bring it into the camp of Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Israel. But to what end? That's the question. What is Pashinyan actually thinking he's going to accomplish with this? There are no security guarantees, which is the main thing to be concerned about. And fine, if there is some sort of economic development that this policy is offering Yerevan, then so be it. But in terms of security, there are no guarantees. And Azerbaijan or Armenia especially, better not think that these policies are somehow going to guarantee Yerevan security against Russia, provisions against Russia, and then based off of that, sort of make take some foolish steps. Because if anyone thinks that Russia, just because it's occupied in Ukraine right now, doesn't have a long memory of what is happening in its strategic underbelly, and how say France, for example, and the collective West are interfering in Armenia, then they have another thing coming, because Russia will remember who stuck to pragmatism and prudence, and who decided to buy into these foolish policies of this Western enticement, so to speak.
Do we currently see any relaxation of the relationship between Russia and Georgia? Your countries, again, we must recall, like, they do not have direct diplomatic contact, despite the fact that the West keeps saying, Tbilisi is the Georgia Dream Party is so pro-Russia. They do not even want to establish direct diplomatic contacts. Still goes through the Swiss embassy, right? Through Swiss mediation, talking officially to each other. Are we seeing any kind of rapprochement at the moment, also when it comes to the question of the two breakaway regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia?
No, the short answer is no. There is a conversation that always sort of floats in the background. But look, Russia is not, did not do this to rebuild Abkhazia or turn it into some, jewel of the Black Sea. There is enormous corruption, drug addiction. I would imagine the same is happening in South Ossetia. These territories are not. Are not being sort of rebuilt by Moscow. That's not the purpose of Abkhazia for Moscow. In fact, powerful, rich, wealthy Russians go there to acquire more territories, to buy more land. And so that sort of pokes into the ultra nationalists in Abkhazia. And there's a conflict there, but again, they're powerless. They cannot do anything against Russia about those policies. But to answer your question, Tbilisi is trying to prolong this as much as possible, to be as pragmatic for as long as possible towards Moscow, because basically all, and I hate to say this, but it doesn't matter what we think, to be perfectly honest with you. This is all the cards are in Moscow's hand, when it comes to restoration of Georgia's sovereignty, and in Washington's, of course, to a certain extent. But mostly, I think the irony here is that if there is any solution to this, is between Tbilisi and Moscow, with Washington's encouragement, help, legitimization of the entire process, of course. But that's right now, that's so far away. It's just the dream talk right now. This is, Georgia is not nowhere near to establishing the relationship between Tbilisi and Moscow are much better. Of course, the trade has restarted. The travel has restarted between the two countries. But geostrategically speaking, I think there is still a long way to go. This is not to say, however, that there is some sort of a non-starter. Here what I would say is the difference between the previous government and today's government, without going into sort of conspiracy theories of the fact that the previous government sort of knew what Russia was going to do if Tbilisi invaded South Ossetia. That's a different story altogether. But in terms of developing at least the soft power relationship with Moscow, I think Tbilisi is creating some, almost very light contours of possible rapprochement, which is in the it's a remote possibility. I would caution against it, of course, not to get too excited about it, but there could be, at least there was a third person, fourth person, perhaps conversations that are taking place behind the scenes. But this is nothing, I would argue, close to being formalized yet.
Okay, some things just need time, but if things don't get better, that's already a good thing for certain circumstances, right?
Well, that's the choice that Georgia has, unfortunately, in the region. Yeah, and the overall speaking, the grand strategy of this is that as long as Moscow, if from the South Caucasus region, there is an elimination of security threat against Russia as Moscow sees it, because Georgia has never threatened Russia. We know this. It can't. It's ridiculous. But we're talking about the collective West using the region, right? Just like the professor was just talking about. If that threat disappears completely, and it hasn't, then maybe perhaps there can be a restoration of talks about restoring or going back to the table and on the drawing board and figuring out a way how to, at the very least, start the conversation of rebuilding some sort of a sovereign arrangement for Georgia, where these two regions will be part of Georgia, but will have some sort of an internal autonomy. But so far, I think nobody's sitting around the table there. If the table is in one room, they're all outside that room, let alone sit around the table. So we'll see. As long as they don't abandon the room itself from the outside and just leave the building, rot on its own, I think this is a better situation strategically speaking.
Right, because the point is, uh, if there's a political solution to Georgia's sovereignty and a complete withdrawal of Russian forces, then that is actually, from the Russian perspective, less of a guarantee that their soft underbelly somehow remains safe, right? So you would need very, very secure guarantees to Russia in order for them to have the incentive to try to change the status quo, because the status quo from Moscow's perspective at the moment is acceptable, right? That's the thing.
Right. Right. And to that point, actually, it's not as if Russia wants this. Russia doesn't want
Don't
more
think so.
headaches strategically. Putin didn't wake up and say, let me just invade Ukraine out of the blue. We know how this was being built up against him. This is not to defend Putin. I always underline that. But what I'm saying is he's a rational actor.
There's a strategic rationale behind what happened, and unless we understand that rationale, we will not get the possible solutions to it. All right.
Right. And that rationale also applies to Georgia and the South Caucasus. Some of my colleagues, analysts are getting excited now about, oh, you see what's happening. Russia is losing Azerbaijan, or, well, Azerbaijan is never to be lost. I separate geoeconomic triumph and speaking geopolitical triumph specifically for Azerbaijan from Russia's security concerns. As Baku and Aliyev understands that geoeconomically in the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan is a necessary state, right? Turkey needs it. Turkey supports it. If Israel is looking at Azerbaijan as a possible platform against Iran, let's just name the facts here. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong for a second, but then yes, it makes Azerbaijan so much more needed, right? So much more necessary as a state in the South Caucasus. No, but even so, that has nothing to do with Azerbaijan's competition in terms of security against Russia. Because when all that in Yekaterinburg, when the scandal happened, and Russians arrested some bad actors, Azerbaijani actors, and then Azerbaijan sort of repaid and arrested Russian who turned out to be, I think, computer programmers or nothing.
It's really, really bizarre because those were Azerbaijanis in Russia, like Russian passport holder, like ethnic Azeris. It's like really bizarre that Azerbaijan would react like that.
Right. And it was just a political game to prove a more fundamental point, saying that Azerbaijan is no longer sort of the younger brother of Moscow, and that Azerbaijan can take care of its national economic and sort of security interests without Russia. It won the war, it returned Nagorno-Karabakh, and it's deciding on its own geoeconomic policies with Turkey and the rest of Europe. Fine. But that sort of got conflated with, Putin or Russia can no longer handle geopolitics or its security needs and interests in the region. And that's a very deceptive, if not superficial way of looking at it. Russia will always have enough power to take care of its national security interests in the region militarily, right? So we're talking about security here. So I think Aliyev understands that perfectly well, and I think we are witnessing now that the whole situation has calmed down. And I think Putin also understands that yes, its adventurism in its invasion of Ukraine has caused it opportunity costs Russia has to undertake. It cannot focus on Armenia or Azerbaijan to the extent that it did, playing the balancing role and providing both countries with weapons and so forth, right, in the early 90s and 2000s. But that I still think that there is a fundamental difference between that and Russia's security interests. Because if it comes to Russia's security interests, say from Azerbaijan or Armenia, Russia will act. There is no doubt in my mind. It has acted before, and history is a strong sort of proof of that. And so Georgia, in this respect, is playing, again, very smart, clever role. And it's got this sort of zero problems with neighbors policy. And I think it should continue with that policy because otherwise it cannot afford to shift the balance or ally with. And by the way, there is no in a classic sense, there is no alliance structure in the South Caucasus, right? All these countries, they want their own thing. They want their own interests. They have their own interests. And besides, who are they going to ally with? If there were a chance of defeating Russia, right? Even then, they couldn't ally because combined, they would not be able to amass enough security wherewithal, a military wherewithal, to do anything against Russia. So this is the game between mainly NATO vis-a-vis Turkey in the region historically. This is the game also to weaken Iran, to shave it off from Russia's strategic interests. And this is the game that also touches on from the Baltic states, geopolitically speaking, through Ukraine, and as Professor said, we keep forgetting. And Kaliningrad also, by the way, is another flashpoint appearing to be that Königsberg, formerly, as we all know, which is currently the Russian territory, and Belarus. This is the sort of a landmass, if you will, taken collectively that the West has always, and the British Empire, I forgot to ask Professor about that, the British Empire sort of historic disdain for Russia, in the region. And so those things, if not repeating themselves in exact sort of historic manner, are certainly, they certainly rhyme. There are still similar patterns that are playing out that bring back the memories of the great game and strategic competition. But again, the West has not been able to do anything about it for centuries. And it seems to me that it's continuing to fail as we speak by engaging in these policies. What is Western Europe thinking? Where is Western Europe now?
Yeah, but it sacrifices a lot, you sacrifice a lot for certain beliefs. And we've seen it like when powers that we understand from pure an economical point of view and a geostrategic point of view, when certain powers throw themselves into a desperate fight, how it ends. I mean, again, this is what happened to Japan. Japan in 1941, a lot of observers in Europe understood very much that they just picked a fight when they did Pearl Harbor, that, well, this is probably gonna go ugly for Japan, even though, okay, you can expand to a certain degree in the beginning, but it was clear that you would run out of oil, period. And you cannot, if you do this contest on all sides, you're putting yourself up on the losing end. And it seems to me that the Europeans are doing exactly that at the moment. They're throwing themselves into so many fights that from every single aspect you look at it, it's going to be a losing fight. Yes, you can shed blood over it, but this ain't gonna be pretty. So I would hope that South Caucasus and especially Georgia do understand that that's not the party to be with. It doesn't mean you have to join Russia. Doesn't mean you have to join Iran. Just not that party to be with.
Just trying to survive as a small state. And there are plenty that history offers for you to follow that lesson. But quickly, when we talk about, to me, it's absurd, even the conversation that Europe can find, according to Macron, strategic independence or autonomy away from Washington against Russia. In terms of what? They're going to create their own NATO. They cannot even come up with 5% financing of NATO contribution to NATO. Just what is your 2 cents on this? Do you honestly think that they can muster up the effort to resist militarily Russia without the United States?
No. You look. The point is, you don't need to resist Russia if you have a good relationship with Russia. And actually, I read today again the June 14, 2024 foreign policy speech Putin gave to his entire foreign policy staff in Moscow, where he also laid out the what would be needed in order to bring the Ukraine war to an end, right? And in one of these aspects, he said, like, yeah, the Europeans are currently in a really bizarre moment and they're hurting themselves. Maybe at some point they want to partner with us again, and well, we are waiting for that to happen, and we're here, we are open for that. And I was like, wow, that is actual strategic common sense. It's like, okay, we're not shutting the door forever, we're just waiting until there's common sense again over there, because currently I do think the Russians understand that this has nothing to do with a rational national analysis of what these different places need. So in that sense, I do believe that there is a future once Europe understands that it has interests in which it sometimes cooperates with Washington, sometimes with Moscow, sometimes with Beijing, and is one of the poles, right? I guess that's the best thing Europe could aspire to, although it might already be well beyond that and have to go through much, much worse times before some kind of rationality can set in again.
Yeah, Russia has been, if you notice, they never shut the door completely against the West. They've always been open. Even now, they're saying that there is a conversation to be had.
They would never again try to be, another part, Berlin, Paris, Moscow. I don't think that they view it as that. But, as a Eurasia and Europe as part of Eurasia, I do think that they have the common sense to actually say, like, yeah, that would be good for Russia. Therefore, why not?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. As long as Putin, but in the long term, though, the question, there is still a question about what is Putin going to do long term, because it seems to me that the collective West is not going to give up on this war. One way or the other, they're going to continue to escalate, to instigate. So for Putin, and this is a question to you, actually, I want to know what you think about this. For Putin, do you think finishing this off, the earlier he finishes this off, the better off he will be strategically, or do you think there is some sort of gain to get out of prolonging this thing, knowing that he will win it?
Just very briefly, I mean, since we do have to end the conversation, but we're speaking on August 7th, and we just had the confirmation that even Vladimir Putin is saying, yeah, a direct talk, a meeting with Donald Trump is on the cards, after having a 3-hour conversation with Mr. Witkoff. I couldn't believe it at first, but now that Vladimir Putin is saying it, is okay, something is happening. So maybe what we're seeing now is some form of disguised debate about a surrender, right? What is the surrender terms? Because we see that Russia is definitely winning on the battlefield, right? But Russia still has an interest in ending this diplomatically, because the last thing you want is an eternal guerrilla war, right? You don't want that.
Occupation, much less, yeah.
Much less occupation. You want some form of settlement that takes into account everything that Russia can possibly get, while also preventing eternal guerrilla warfare. And I do believe, in a sense, this is what the Americans also had to, in a sense, negotiate with the Japanese, to make sure that they actually lay down the goddamn weapons, and then you continue with the political with the occupation and the political engagement, right? So Russia needs to get to that point where they can go to the political engagement without the shooting. And in that sense, I do think that there's a strong incentive to come to some form of understanding, to end the proxy war, and then get to a realistic political process in and with Ukraine that resolves this horrible thing. But the resolution can take 20, 30 years, because these wounds to heal will be very long.
Unfortunately, all this could have been avoided, and now we're sitting here talking about this great tragedy.
And, I am very glad that Georgia didn't go down that very sad route. And I do hope it remains like this. And we are nearing the 1-hour mark. Lasha Kasradze, thank you very much for your time today.
Pascal, thank you very much for having me.